For a brief moment, the flags of Almoravids and Almohads united and strengthened Al-Andalus, reviving its brilliance and cultural vitality. Its victories against the Christian Reconquista reminded the world that this land would not go quietly into the night. But history has a way of testing even the strongest empires. As the Reconquista gained momentum, the cracks in the Almohads' rule became impossible to ignore. The Christian kingdoms of the north, united and determined, posed an ever-growing threat, their ambition fueled by religious zeal and political strategy. The tide was turning, and Al-Andalus was at the crossroads of destiny. This show has epic battles, main figures, and relentless struggles defining this era. It is the story of the cross and the crescent, the story of power, survival, and a civilization fighting to stay in history. The clash begins. As Al-Andalus continued to suffer from internal conflict and divided leadership, the northern Christian kingdoms took this opportunity to unite and advance their cause. Once rivals, Castile, Aragon, and Navarre began to find common ground in their shared religious fervor and territorial ambitions. This was the birth of a powerful coalition, intent on reclaiming lands lost centuries ago. These kingdoms were consolidated using strategic alliances. Political marriages, such as those between Castilian and Aragonese royalty, consolidated the alliances and offered a united front against their Muslim neighbors. This was not simply a struggle over land. The Reconquista was driven by a story of religious redemption and the desire to re-establish Christian rule over the Iberian Peninsula. The success of this phase was on early occasions well registered, as in the conquest of Toledo by Alfonso VI of Castile in 1085. Toledo, under Muslim control, had become a city with tolerable and flourishing cultural landscapes, but now it was used as a rallying point for the expansion of the Christians. Such feats provided northern kingdoms with momentum to sustain the long, arduous campaign that eventually shifted the power balance in the Iberian Peninsula. As the Reconquista gained momentum, the stage was set for an epic clash of civilizations, a battle not just for land, but for identity, faith, and the future of the region. It was the year 1212, and the Iberian Peninsula had reached a critical point of decision. The Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre had been advancing southward for several decades, and the Almohad Caliphate had been weakened, unable to contain itself within the boundaries of Al-Andalus. As Christian forces united and the strength of the Almohad began to deteriorate, this clash would create an event forever to be in the memory books. Things soon picked up the pace when the Christian forces were led by Alfonso VIII of Castile, who allied themselves with other Christian rulers, Pedro II of Aragon and Sancho VII of Navarre. Their idea was clear-cut: destroy the Almohad fortress and win the south for them. So the Almohad Caliph Muhammad al-Nasir prepared a huge army from all of North Africa and Al-Andalus with a plan to obliterate the advance of the Christians. The call for a crusade reverberated across Europe, bolstering Alfonso VIII's forces with volunteers from France and beyond. The combined Christian army, strengthened by its shared purpose and faith, set out to meet the Almohads, knowing the stakes were nothing less than the future of the Iberian Peninsula. The two armies clashed on the 16th of July, 1212, on the plains of Las Navas de Tolosa. The Almohads had the initial upper hand because they had greater manpower and better trained troops. A heavily fortified camp, protected with chains and heavily guarded by elite forces, seemed invincible. But Christian forces, in the minority as they were astute. Alfonso VIII of Castile organized a joint assault, while Sancho VII of Navarre came in through a surprise attack on the fortified camp. Surprise and perseverance broke through chain defenses in favor of the Christians in downing an already disheveled Almohad army. As disorder spread, the united Almohad army dispersed. Muhammad al-Nasir, fled the battlefield, leaving his army to suffer a disastrous defeat. Thousands of Almohad soldiers fell and were captured, the outcome of the battle to the side of the Christian coalition. The Battle of Las Navas de Tolosa proved to be a landmark in the course of the Reconquista. It shook the foundations of the Almohad Caliphate and opened Al-Andalus for Christian forces to move freely there. Now all those central cities and provinces that had so far remained Muslim rule's bastions were threatened with this wave of conquest that no power could resist. This battle was more than just a win. It had given Al-Andalus a psychological defeat in its effort to retain its dominance within the land. For the Christian kingdoms, it stood as a time of revival and further decided their efforts at reconquering Iberia. The dark silhouette of the Reconquista weighed heavier than before, and days of glory over Al-Andalus were surely counted. Atrocious defeats during these years also saw the rapid deterioration of the decline of the Muslim rule over Al-Andalus. When Las Navas de Tolosa devastated the remaining armies of a once mighty Almohad Caliphate, Al-Andalus found itself no longer able to sustain the straining forces both of internal conflict and external conquest. This once potent unifying political force splintered the regional leaders due to its incompetence, and otherwise left the other regional leaders sufficiently weakened and hence divided in their resistance to an overwhelming tide of Reconquista. City by city, those once shining cities that epitomized Islamic brilliance went down. The jewel of Al-Andalus, Córdoba, was taken by the Christian forces in 1236. The psychological blow this gave to the Muslim community is not to be underestimated. The city of Seville, the other cultural and economic hub, was taken over by Ferdinand III of Castile in 1248. It was more than the loss of war. The decline had a deep cultural and psychological impact. The Muslim population had to face displacement, forced conversions, and loss of rich heritage. The lively intellectual and artistic life that defined Al-Andalus began to wane as fear and uncertainty surrounded the region. For the remaining inhabitants, the dream of a united and prosperous Al-Andalus became impossible, sad reminder of how fragile even the greatest civilizations could be. Even as the Reconquista tide swept through Al-Andalus, stories of resistance and resilience emerged as testaments to the people's indomitable spirit. Though fragmented, Muslim leaders and communities showed remarkable courage in the face of overwhelming odds. Figures like Muhammad ibn al-Ahmar, founder of the Emirate of Granada, navigated the shifting political landscape to establish Granada as the final bastion of Muslim rule in Iberia. This little kingdom survived more than 2 centuries after Córdoba and Seville had fallen by alliances, tributes, and above all, defensive fortifications such as the magnificent Alhambra. Granada itself became an emblem of resistance. The kings there developed a more vibrant court culture which could preserve and add to the intellectual and artistic heritage of Al-Andalus. Meanwhile, ordinary communities managed to survive and keep their traditions and identity alive amidst the increasing Christian domination. The scholars, poets, and artisans continued working, and because of this, the culture of Al-Andalus survived. Despite the piling up of military casualties, the spirit of innovativeness and learning that had characterized this civilization could not be destroyed. It was the Al-Andalus epoch, the tale of rebellion against decay, when the flickering embers of strength shone like beacons amidst the spreading dark of conquest. It's a reminder that while empires come and go, their heritage endures in the hearts and minds of people who love them. Religion played a great role in defining the Reconquista narrative, hence becoming a powerful tool for the mobilization of the people on both sides, Christian and Muslim. For the Christian kingdoms of Castile, Aragon, and Navarre, the Crusader mentality remained central to their efforts. It was not just a military campaign, but rather a holy war to recover the Christian lands from the infidels. The Pope's benedictions and promises of indulgences were mobilized for Christian knights and soldiers, so the conquest of Al-Andalus would seem to be a divine mission. Symbols and slogans with religious overtones were rampant, and victory was considered an implementation of God's will. On the other hand, Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus also made religious rhetoric to inspire resistance. Muslim leaders called the spirit of jihad, or struggle in the path of Allah, a rallying cry to defend their Muslim lands. Muslim leaders, such as the Almohad caliphs and their successors, employed the ideology of jihad to legitimize the military campaigns and to call up the Muslim population. This was more than a call to arms for territorial integrity. It was, rather, an affirmation of faith and identity as well against encroaching forces of Christianity. Both parties use faith as grounds to justify their cause and at the same time install a sense of responsibility and service among them. It not only built a ground for the spiritual phenomenon, but emerged also as a force that could shape war performance as well as history. Holy zeal by both the belligerents made the fight even more bitter and harsh. They would both consider their battle as not one for the cause of politics, but indeed to have God's pleasure. Though fighting under the harsh context of the Reconquista, exchange still occurs between the Christian to the Muslim realms about knowledge, art, or anything about ideas. A state of warfare only would represent some goods, as their treasures may serve the goods gained between other mutual cultures and only augment good effects. The influence is majorly shown on buildings. The sophisticated designs of the architecture of Muslims influenced Christian rulers of the Iberian Peninsula, which can be observed in detail in churches and palaces, many of them using Islamic geometric patterns, arches, and minaret-like towers. The flow of knowledge was similarly deep into science. The Islamic scholars had managed to preserve and augment the knowledge available in ancient Greek and Roman writings that they transferred to the Christian scholars. During the time of the Crusades, through scholars of such Christian traditions and across cultural exchanges, including with such places as the Kingdom of Castile and Catalonia, translations into Latin for philosophy, mathematics, astronomy, and medicine took place. Hence, this interaction of cultures between the Christians and the Muslims, even in this period of division and war, left behind a legacy as they borrowed from each other to help mold the destiny of science, architecture, and trade in Europe. It's probably unmatched in the record of time as the Reconquista rumbles on incessantly with giant strides. And still, peace breaks the vibrancy of civilization within Al-Andalus, or will questioningly the last stronghold of the Muslims within Iberia continue to withstand the growing power of the Christian kingdoms of the Kingdom of Granada, its Granada city of contributions that have no precedence in the world's human heritage through culture and architecture. However, the shadow of the Reconquista nevertheless hangs over it as ever looming. Will the Nasrid dynasty withstand the onslaught to preserve its patrimony, or will the Muslim rule in Iberia go into its last chapter? The fate of Granada is about to take a dramatic turn. As the Christian forces grow ever closer, the end of an era is imminent. But what will that end look like?